Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Princeton class of 1970. I'm sorry I can't be with you in Houston this afternoon, but I'm happy to have this opportunity to talk about some of these fascinating subjects that Lane has suggested you all might be interested in considering. I'm going to address four different parts of really the same subject. First, I'm talking in general about what does it mean to be Hispanic, or what is Hispanism. And then I'm going to talk about how my experience at Princeton as undergraduate, how study prepared me to understand this and put me in a career that engages this matter daily. And then finally, trends in Hispanic population, trends in the Hispanic world in the United States, and finally, the study of Hispanism and Spanish, how it's carried on and what direction it might be headed. First, let me touch on the most fundamental part of this discussion, and that is language and the use of words. There are three words that are tremendously important when we talk about the Hispanic world in the United States. First, the obvious word Hispanic. Second, the word Chicano. And finally, the word Latino. Let me start with the word Hispanic. This is the easiest word, Hispania, España. It, of course, means people or language or culture that come from Spain, that have some origin in Spain. It's the word until rather recently was used to refer to everyone who spoke Spanish. Second, the word Chicano. The word Chicano began really in California. It was a word of protest. It was part of the movement begun by Cesar Chavez and those who picked fruits and vegetables, the migrant workers in California. It began as part of a movement to insist upon a decent life for these people. While much is improved, that population is still vastly underpaid and exploited in California. If you look at any of the documentaries recently made about the life of migrant workers, it will make you eat your California vegetables and fruits with a very different feel. So the word Chicano came to mean those Hispanic peoples, largely Mexican, but from all over the Western Hemisphere, who found themselves mostly illegally in California, picking fruits, picking vegetables for terrible wages. Old men and old women, children put out in a field all day, 9 or 10 hours in the sun, no restroom facilities. You went behind a tree, you squatted behind a bush. Children, old people, this was terrible. So the fact that it's a word that was born in protest and born with a certain amount of anger is, of course, completely understandable. And then the third word, Latino, is the one most recently used. The word Latino avoids the somewhat recently minted anger toward the Spaniards because of the conquista. Parts of Mexico, parts of Central America, South America continue to maintain a real animus toward Spain because of the reconquest. The perceived rape of the land, the abuse of peoples, the unfair treatment of the indigenous populations, Spain as the conqueror and Spain as the exploiter. And so the word Hispanic for these peoples tends to mean a very different thing, and it tends to carry with it historical baggage that a lot of people would like to be without. Those of us who study the history of this coolly try to point out that, the Spaniards came and they established missions, and they were very concerned about questions of religion, and they married the indigenous peoples. There was no similar thing that happened in the United States. The English settlers had no desire to intermarry with the natives. They had no desire to educate or to share a religion with the natives. There are many ways to understand the Spanish conquest of Spanish America as having aspects that were more benevolent than those practiced by the English settlers. Still in all, someone born in Mexico, angry, feeling part of the indigenous population, feeling abused, is not going to like the word Hispanic, and that animus is transferred to some extent to people of Hispanic descent living in the United States. Chicano, as I said, is a name born of protest. Latino seemed to avoid all of the negative baggage. Latino meant somebody from the Latinate world. So it can mean a descendant of Spanish settlers, Portuguese settlers, Italian settlers, French settlers, Romanian settlers, anybody from the Latin-based languages. In practice, it has never really meant much more than Hispanics who don't want to use the word Hispanic, who want to avoid it and use Latino as a word not freighted with perceived injustices of the past. So you will hear a lot of talk now in our country about the Latino population. We're not talking about the French or the Italians or the Romanians, and in most cases not even the Portuguese. It tends to refer to Hispanics. 10 years ago, I would have said to you that this is a Texas problem, and I would have asked you to indulge me, being from Texas and living and working in Texas, to discuss something that is probably bounded by Texas, California, Florida, perhaps New York City. Now, of course, as you know, in the last decade, the Hispanic population has fanned out all over the United States. So there are tremendous numbers of people, Latino, Chicano, Hispanic, who live in every large city in the nation. The Spanish language has gone with them, and so it is widely spread throughout the country. It is also widely studied, and this has had some very interesting repercussions for teachers and for professions. When I first began as a teacher of Spanish, 1970, in September, I was hired to teach at the Hotchkiss School, Lakeville, Connecticut. Magnificent institution, one on which I subsequently served as a member of the Board of Trustees, a school for which I still maintain tremendous gratitude and respect. In 1970 at Hotchkiss, there were 2 Spanish teachers and about 10 French teachers. There was a big conference held annually of language teachers in New York City. Spanish had about 3 card tables of materials put out. French had a warehouse. And in that era, I very much realized quickly, it was a surprise coming from South Texas, but if you taught Spanish, you were perceived to be a second-class citizen. Spanish was also, there were a number of Hotchkiss parents in that era who said to me, "Oh, I'm so glad my son is going to learn Spanish. No one can talk to the help. No one can communicate with the yard man. So now Ricky can come home and he can make it understood." If you wanted a language for commerce, for life, for class, you studied French. That has all now changed tremendously. If you go to the Northeast Conference, you will see 2 card tables of French and 2 warehouses of Spanish. The numbers of sections of French taught in universities across the nation have plummeted. Spanish is everywhere. So it is clearly our second language, our second minority. Anything I would say about Spanish in Texas, I think you would find is very much a part of the world that you are familiar with, irrespective of the city in which you live in the United States. I will tell you one amusing anecdote. We had a member of our faculty who taught here for a number of years. His wife hated living in Laredo. Laredo is 90% Hispanic. 85% of the population of Laredo speaks Spanish at home. So it's not possible to live here and not like being around Spanish and Spanish-speaking people. This lady despised it. They were from Arkansas. So she insisted finally, after many years here, she wanted to move home to Arkansas. So they moved back to a town they called it Buena Vista. I don't think it occurred to them that that's actually Buena Vista. Nobody there spoke Spanish. Nobody was Hispanic. They moved back. Meanwhile, Walmart has opened up warehouses and distribution centers all over Arkansas and staffed them, surprise, surprise, by Hispanic people who speak Spanish. They go back home to Buena Vista and go to register their car at the county courthouse and stand in line behind hundreds of Spanish-speaking people whose sole purpose is to register a car in Buena Vista. They were very upset. And he called me laughing and said, "My wife thought she was getting away from you guys. She's fallen right back into your lap. I guess we can't get away." Well, that is the larger message. I hope it's not a question of get away. I hope it's perceived as a blessing that this magnificent language and this rich ancient culture is now part of the American story and a central part of the American story. So, to summarize, Chicano, Hispanic, Latino. Chicano, language of protest, California. In Texas, it's not a popular word. In Laredo, it's an offensive word. If the word is used, one very close friend of mine said, "You don't understand, to us this is the N-word." That's a terrible thing to say, but completely understandable. It was not born of protests here, a point which I'll get to in a moment. It was in California, so it's a word that's used in certain places to designate this population. Hispanic, anybody from Spain speaking Spanish, and then finally Latino, the acomodo, the agreement, the compromise word that really doesn't say anything because Spain and Spanish have very little to do with Latin, and French and Italian and Romanian don't even enter. But the language, the word has now become the word of choice because it's not burdened by these historic issues, or not perceived to be burdened by these issues. Let me talk for a moment then about Princeton and Princeton's role in leading me into this profession, because although I'm from here, although I spoke Spanish as a child, although I did not say one word in English to my children until they entered kindergarten, I really owe my love of Spanish and my decision to spend my life studying and teaching Spanish to Princeton. A fact that frankly horrified my parents. They sent me from South Texas to New Jersey to school. When I told them I was going to major in Spanish, what? Spanish? We went all the way there to major in Spanish? How absurd. Should have stayed here. Well, actually, no. Princeton was the great beneficiary of the diaspora, the leaving of intellectuals in Spain during the Spanish Civil War. And as Lane can explain to you even far better than I, the Princeton Spanish department was really created and made famous by a number of Spanish exiles, university professors, the most noted Americo Castro, whose books on Spanish history changed the way people think about Spain. He was at Princeton. And Vicente Llorens and Enrique Tierno Galvan, who taught Lane, taught me, and who after Franco died went back to become mayor of Madrid, very famous man. These people pulled us into this magnificent world of Spanish Republican exiles, Spanish intellectuals against Franco, against fascism, and that was just a tremendously exciting world. The Spanish Civil War has been interesting to Americans forever. What we all know, the most famous example, of course, being Hemingway. Well, in the 1960s in Spain, those same people that Hemingway knew and wrote about were now in their 60s living and teaching in Princeton. And it was from them that I heard about the exciting story of Spain. Of course, the Civil War, but before that, Don Quixote, Cervantes, the Middle Ages, the Poema de Mio Cid, this tremendous world. And for me, it was particularly exciting because it resonated with the world of my childhood. It was, after all, Spanish, but it was the origin. It was like getting to see finally the first half of the movie that you had knew the ending of by heart, but you had no idea how it started. Suddenly, here I was, these brilliant Spaniards teaching us about Spain and helping me understand the Mexico and South Texas that I came from. So it was an instant love. After I graduated, the height of the Vietnam War, what could I do? I had a degree in Spanish. I could maybe teach Spanish. Hotchkiss hired me. After 1 year of teaching Spanish at Hotchkiss, I knew I wanted to do this for the rest of my life. I went back to Princeton. After a year at Harvard as a graduate student, very disenchanting. That was the era in which people hid books in the library and tore articles out of journals because they didn't want other graduate students to find them. I never heard of such a thing at Princeton. I went back to Princeton, threw myself across the desk of Professors King and Forcioni and Willis and said, can I come back and get my PhD here? And they said yes. So I did, and then from that point forward have taught Spanish. It was a tremendous opportunity to learn about something that without Princeton I never would have imagined. Beyond that, I very much was imbued with the Princeton spirit of it's your duty to go do something good for somebody else. A book published by Andrew Del Banco, a professor at Columbia, a couple of years ago called College, What It Is, What It Was, What It Is, What It Might Be, talks about this amazing quality at Princeton, Harvard, and Yale. These institutions founded by stern New England, Protestant, Unitarians, Congregationalists who believed that everything good was a fortuitous gift of chance, that if we were sitting in a classroom studying with a brilliant professor a wonderful subject, it was an accident. We didn't deserve it. And the only reasonable response to that great good fortune was go out and make the world better. And you will remember in the 60s, the motto was Princeton in the nation's service. And all my teachers in that era asked me the same question. When you get out of here, what are you going to do to serve other people? What are you going to do to show that this great opportunity wasn't wasted on you? Because you didn't do anything to deserve this. I heard this, I thought this, I internalized it, I believed it. I really wanted to go and teach. I wanted to do something to show that the Princeton experience was not wasted on me. And I was not alone. This was the zeitgeist of our class. Trends in Hispanic population, Hispanism, what's going on in the country. This is a vast topic that I can only give you my own unique take on. There's a vast explosion in the Hispanic population. The only reason the United States has a population that is not at a net loss is because of the Hispanic community. Our net reproductive rate is still about between 2.3 and 2.6 children per woman able to have children. That is barely holding our own in the reproduction market. If you read a book written recently by Jonathan Last, a very brilliant young man who wrote a book called What to Expect When No One's Expecting. His point is that, and he cites Italy and Japan as nations that have already gone over the cliff. They may not be able to come back. Nobody has children, and the population begins to fall. And of course, all you need is one generation in which the birth rate drops, and then you have fewer net new people to create new births, and so it's very hard to reverse. His point is that only because the Hispanic population in America is our birth rate not well below repopulation, replenishing our death rate. So it's an interesting, I would say the first thing happening is the Hispanic population is helping us keep our own population from sinking. That will change because he demonstrates further that throughout the world that economic prosperity and improvement immediately translates into a drop in the birth rate. In the last decade, the birth rate in Mexico has dropped from 6 to 2.6. Why? Mexicans have gotten more prosperous. Mexican women have other opportunities. They don't want to have as many children. It's universal, happens all over the world. So the problem is predictably exportable to countries as they become more productive and more prosperous. Eventually, American, Hispanics, Latinos, whatever we call them, will have a birth rate, if trends continue, that matches the rate of the gringo population. That will not be good for us. So initially, we could say that this population is helping us replenish our national stock. In addition to that, the population is slowly assimilating in ways that I think those horrified by what are perceived as outsiders and foreign languages probably don't realize. In the university population, which increasingly all Americans, I'm happy to say, are able to enter, the number of people marrying within their ethnic group plummets. You should be very suspicious and very unbelieving when you hear demographers project forward and say, based on the numbers today, we can tell you that by 2040, 45%, 55%, whatever, of all Americans are going to be of Hispanic descent. Well, they may be, but they won't necessarily call themselves Hispanic. People don't marry in their ethnic groups reliably after they get into college. There's a great mixing and matching. An article in the New York Times several years ago, it was a front cover of the weekly magazine, the Sunday Weekly, showed a picture of a, you couldn't tell it was a man or a woman. It was a very attractive, youngish person with a sort of a olive-colored complexion, brownish eyes, and the article said, this is what all Americans are going to look like. The very fair and the very dark are going to slowly merge to the center in a more blended, sort of Mediterranean, lighter shade of brown. This is where our nation is going. People don't necessarily marry in their ethnic groups. So projecting these figures forward is probably risky. That same article said that their thought was that by 2050, the number of Americans, I can't remember the percent, but it was very funny the way they described it, X percentage of Americans will have a grandmother or a great-grandmother named Garcia on one side, and on the other side, Wong. Perhaps, again, these are all crystal ball looking things. You remember in the 1970s when we were told that there would be one nation, one city from Boston to Florida, and it would be bumper to bumper, and there would be no unpaved ground. Of course, that hadn't quite happened. So Hispanics form a huge part of this population, and Hispanic growth continues very robust. You can see in the political life of the country there's tremendous desire to add Hispanics to tickets, political tickets, precisely because there's a hope to garner that population. I want to say something about the Hispanic society in America, or Latino society, that may be too obvious for words, but it's worth saying. We hear a lot talk about the Hispanic vote. It may be that that's an appropriate phrase for now, but every year that passes, it becomes less significant and less appropriate. First, let me say to you what you probably understand if you think about it at all. The Hispanic world is not monochromatic. Everybody whose first language is Spanish does not come from exactly the same tradition. So the trend that I see is increasingly a move away from even the speaking of Spanish. The first generation speaks only Spanish, struggles with English. Second generation does both. By the third generation, the grandchildren understand Spanish, but they don't speak it anymore. I'm sorry, because I think it's a tremendous loss to be bilingual. America must be the only place in the developed world where being bilingual is a big deal. Most Europeans, at least 3 languages, sometimes 4 are a minimum number. We're thrilled to have 2. I fear that advantage is slowly being lost because I see in Texas, I see in Laredo, I see third generation residents able to converse with their parents and grandparents in English and understand what they say back in Spanish. It's amusing to see this often. You see multi-generational conversations. The children speak English, the grandparents understand it, but they can't answer in English. They answer back in Spanish, which the children can understand, but can't speak. I see this as an increasing trend, an unfortunate one, I repeat, because we certainly as Americans ought to aspire to be at least bilingual. And very close to us, people are more than that. A lamentable trend. As English has supplanted French as the international language, Americans increasingly find it unnecessary. Doesn't everybody speak English? Well, everybody just about does. It's a sad loss because speaking the language allows you to get inside the culture. I cannot imagine life without the intimate relationship I've had with Hispanic culture, made possible by Princeton. And without the language, it's very hard to feel that intimacy. A trend that I find very disturbing in universities all over the country is this proliferation of courses that are called something diversity or global. But nobody in the course can speak one word of anything but English, nobody can read anything but English, and nobody thinks about anything except in English. I can assure you that you can read 50 books on Mexico in English and you can understand a lot, but if you can't speak Spanish and can't understand Spanish, there's a wall you can never jump over. Well, the same surely is true of the Arab world, surely it's true of the Chinese world, surely it's true of all places in the world. I know it's true of Mexico because I live here and I watch it every day. It's not a mystery why we as Americans have blundered so often internationally, because we simply haven't understood or haven't bothered to understand or to engage the culture and the language of another country. This is a troubling trend. More foreign language should be taught in the United States. Americans routinely say, but why? Everybody speaks English. Well, the reason why is so that perhaps you have a chance of understanding what somebody else in another culture thinks or does and why they think it or do it and why things are as they are. Thank you.